chances are your last attack in Clash of Clans was you dropping a bunch of stuff and not thinking twice of it. This is spam. Literally. I'm about to make lunch. But really, what is spam? Well, it varies from person to person, but generally spam can be defined as an army mostly comprised of one troop, sometimes multiple, and does not involve other alliances for success, like a hero walk, kill squad, or any complicated multi-stage process. It's those armies that you drop everything and just hope that it works. But what was the first spam strategy? Well, the first documented case of a true spam attack was on September 29, 2012, when a player got attacked by 10 dragons. Unfortunately, dragons didn't deal splash damage at the time, so they were overwhelmed by dozens of archers, which they had to take out one by one, leading to a fail. If only he had spent 14 hours training a lightning spell. Right? The early days of spam attacks were rough. Players didn't have the luxury to train spells for every attack, so it wasn't uncommon to have none at all. Having to deal with a clan castle was a huge threat to mass dragons. But players prevailed. With their 5-hour army that might get them a 2-star, they carried on, and thus was the birth of spam, aka spam and forget, aka spray and pray, aka the dice roll, aka spam, and close the game. Alright, but seriously, players had been spamming barbarians, archers, and goblins long before that, but I'm not sure if anyone actually considers that spam. Dragon spam was incredibly strong for its time, and it only got better. More levels were added, and spell brewing time was dramatically decreased, so now everyone could train some lightnings and bring it with their dragons. It would help with CC troops. It was incredibly popular for high-level attacks. I mean, it was Jorge Yao's army, the first person to reach 4,000 trophies. You don't accidentally just stumble there. Cheating or not, he had to be doing something right. Around the same time, villages started to be attacked by balloon parades. Yeah, just balloons. The struggle was real. The only other air attack was dragons, and sometimes they were paired together, but mass balloons was a whole thing. You would spread them out in one side of the base in true spam and forget fashion, and hope for the best. This was a bit harder to pull off because if you deploy them wrong, it would lead to the balloons dying prematurely and not being able to clean up, and so they were often paired with archers. The 2012 spam attack scene was pretty bare bones. There weren't many tools to help your attacks and to deal with clan castle troops, so it was a bit of a hit or miss. It only really went mainstream in 2013. By early 2013, massive improvements had been made to dragon and balloon spam. Dragons got a little bit of splash damage, so they could finally deal with clan castle troops without the lightning spells, and the balloons now dealt death damage and had the perfect synergy with the new troop. Minions. Mass balloons paired with minions would be known as Balloonian, which would absolutely dominate the skies throughout 2013. But something happens that July. For the first time in Clash history, there was a ground troop disrupting the meta like never before. The Witch. You've likely heard the stories of how the Witch used to be invincible, how defenses couldn't even touch her. That's because the skeleton she spawned was eating up defenses like those dang nematodes from SpongeBob, all while activating traps so the witch wouldn't randomly blow up. And all while the witch stayed 5 tiles away. Legend says she needed a walkie-talkie to talk to the skeletons.
Don't touch that, Larry.
This allowed the witch to be a troop that could be spammed by itself. With the amount of skeletons in front of her, defenses were way too distracted. The witch would eventually be nerfed shortly after, so it wasn't uncommon to bring a golem in your clan castle or train one so that the witches had some extra protection from all those defenses. This strategy was widely used in the leaderboards, and it eventually spawned another strategy called Go Wee Wee, golems, witches, and wizards. While this was happening, there was another Dark Relation troop that had recently been buffed, Hog Riders. After Supercell realized that no one was using it, they would buff the Hog Rider into an absolute unit. The new reworked Hog targeted defenses only, took less housing space, and dealt more damage. It was now the perfect troop to spam. And believe me, players did not waste any time. By September 2013, mass hogs were everywhere due to how stupid easy it was to drop over 40 of these, periodically drop some heals, and see them shred the base from the inside out. Hog Raiders were basically the first viral spam strategy to take over Clash of Clans. Everyone and their mama was doing it, and that time, I mean it. And though the Hogs did get hit with several nerfs that year, Hog spam was nowhere near dead. But yeah, like I said, 2013 was the year for spam attack developments. By the end, you had many options: dragons, Balloonian, mass witches, and Hog Riders. And while some nerfs did keep it sort of under control, Supercell started to take some different approaches to dealing with the condition of the meta. For example, adding a multi-target mode to the Inferno, and also making it so that it blocks healing, which would have directly impacted pretty much all of these attacks at higher levels. And also adding levels to traps. Not all of these changes were to directly nerf spam attacks, everything else got nerfed as well, but it certainly had an impact on the feasibility of simply spamming a troop and forgetting about it. By early 2014, all of the previous mentioned strategies were still intact. A little hard to pull off at Town Hall 10 with those Infernos, but they worked. And for a while, it was pretty quiet. Nothing much happened in the first half of the year. But alas, in July 2014, the Hog spam was about to change forever. The giant bombs now dealt 50% more damage to Hog Raiders only. Meaning, if you had two giant bombs side by side and it detonated near a group of Hog Raiders, they were no more. This was a direct nerf to this strategy. It didn't really kill mass hogs, it just took more luck. The only way your hogs would survive is if a base had under-leveled giant bombs or they weren't in that double configuration. For war attacks, it definitely went out the door depending on the base, but for casual trophy pushing and farming, if you wanted to waste all your Dark Elixir on it, it didn't go away. But during the Hog Raider shenanigans, there was also another troop that was about to join the Spray and Brave movement, the Valkyrie. At that point in time, she was already in the game for over a year, but she was kind of cheeks. July 2014 was significant for the Valkyrie because they reworked her AI to go for in-between buildings. Revolutionary. Whoa. So now she made full use of her area splash damage. All of a sudden, training an army full of Valkyries wasn't such a terrible idea. They went ham, especially when paired with heal spells. They were kind of like an alternative to Hog Riders. However, at the time, it was considered a good spam strat only for Town Hall 9 and under. Like most things, they just couldn't go up against Inferno Towers unless they were set to single target mode. Every Hog spammer's dream. In that case, it did pretty decent. The final thing in 2014 that had an impact on spam attacks was the introduction of the Lava Hound. There was no Lava Hound spam or anything like that. However, Balloonian became Lavaloonian, or at least mostly replaced by it at upper town halls. And because they acted as shields against the OP Inferno Towers, Lavaloonian took over the meta. Throughout the years, Lavaloonian spawned a whole host of strategies, but OG Lalo was pure spam. With that said, 2014 wasn't a big year for spam attack developments, but it certainly had some interesting meta changes. And it continued to change in interesting ways in 2015. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary: Hog Riders turning into bacon, dragons being dropped in a line, witches in one corner of the base, and Valkyries being Valkyries, with their goofy AI. But toward the end of April, air spam was in for a rude awakening. Up to this point, most of the nerfs were for ground attacks. Air had gone unchecked for a while. Until now. The new Air Sweeper was the first air-only defense specifically designed to counter strategies like Lavaloon and Mass Dragons. This was the answer to a meta that had been taken over by air spam, and it was effective. I mean, at the time people thought Lavaloon was dead and air attacks were no more, but no, it wasn't like that. This just meant that you couldn't face roll dragons anymore. In fact, it wasn't even that big of a deal because they'd add a second one in June. That's when things started to get real serious, and air was going through some tough times. Meanwhile, ground was booming. They had just added the earthquake spell, which helped basically any ground attack, except for hogs, obviously. As you can now open up the base and let everything flow through and annihilate everything in their way. You could already do this before with jump spells, but earthquakes were better in every way. Valkyrie and witch spam was booming. And on top of that, in December, the witch got her first level since she was added all the way back in 2013. And with the introduction of the Grand Warden, which was capable of protecting them from infernos, it was about to go down. Mass witches took over the meta at Town Hall 10 and 11, so much that it became a problem. Some players were tired and fed up with the witch spam meta, calling it boring and lazy. By early 2016, some players were calling for action. They wanted Supercell to push strategy back into the game and do away with all the spam nonsense, and they almost immediately got to work. Toward the end of January, they added an extra air defense to Town Hall 6 and 7 to combat mass balloons and dragon spam. They didn't kill these strategies, just made it a bit hard to 3-star while blindfolded. And it wasn't even safe on the ground, as not long after they added levels to spring traps, which was devastating to any ground army. It was a minefield out there. However, for mass witches, it was a totally different story. EU artilleries now did 3 times more damage to golems, which was often used with witches, and in March 2016, they reduced the HP of the witches' skeletons, and they no longer triggered traps, which was a big part of why mass witches was so popular in the first place. They triggered the traps before the witch could blow up. Though many spam strategies were still well and alive, every single one of them had been nerfed significantly. This was truly an end of an era. Did you know spam was a staple food during World War II? But not because soldiers liked it, but because it was cheap and shelf-stable. However, they'd eventually get bored of it and would send letters to get someone to change it, but unfortunately they were told that spam was going nowhere. Similarly, in 2016, it became clear that spam attacks were going nowhere. Supercell might have slowed it down and killed off certain strategies, but the simple fact is that the majority of players were casuals. They wanted to drop a ton of troops and see everything vanish, and they weren't gonna let that go. For the next year, there was sort of a back and forth on whether spam had a place in the meta or not. It was like a war on spam. After a long hiatus of spam being ineffective, the recently released bowlers would receive several buffs, and by the summer of 2016, they were everywhere. All you had to do was bring a couple healers with you and the bowlers would survive the entire battle. It was nuts. You could take on max bases without breaking a sweat. Around the same time, the miners were also added, and boy were they OP. It was really hard not to spam these new troops. The miners were stupid fast, shredding everything like hogs in their prime. And the bowlers had good survivability and dealt decent damage. How could you not? And on top of that, the Valkyries had recently been reworked again, making them an absolute beast. Spam attacks were back. But it's not like Supercell let it be. In fact, they weren't a fan, saying that one troop shouldn't be able to shred Town Hall 11 so easily, and rest assured, they were cooking up a new defense that would counter spam specifically. But in the meantime, they tried to control it with some nerfs, like a speed reduction to the miners and nerfing the healers, which indirectly affected bowler spam. But all of these changes didn't do much to these spam attacks. The meta was absolutely busted by these bowler, Valkyrie, and miner spams. However, in September, the new defense that would put an end to spam was here. The bomb tower. Right away, players noticed the effects of the bomb tower, which was designed to deal splash damage to a large group of troops. It was like a wizard tower on steroids, but this one exploded on its way out. Spam was in trouble. They had literally created an anti-spam defense. Except it wasn't really that strong. Its effectiveness against spam was wildly overestimated. The bomb tower didn't really put an end to spam at all. It was more like a speed bump than anything else. And shortly after the addition of the bomb tower, several troops got buffed. For example, the giant bomb's damage multiplier that was exclusive to hogs was removed, which made hogs even stronger despite this new defense. Witches were buffed twice. They were insanely strong by the end of the year, and balloons were given one of the most impactful buffs in its history. It's no surprise that by the end of the year, spam attacks were everywhere. Spam was booming. Supercell was losing this war. But it only got better for spam in 2017, especially how it seems Supercell had a change of heart, or a change of strategy. I don't know what it was. They just started buffing a bunch of troops like hogs, miners, witches, dragons, all of the spammables. What was going on? And throughout the year, many of these troops would get new levels as well. Now, certain defenses also got new levels, but offense was certainly much stronger than defense at this time. Supercell was being incredibly generous with all of these buffs and new levels. It's as if they had given up. Even in the new builder base, Baby Dragons and Night Witch spam was taking over. Something was changing. But the most significant change of 2017 was that in December, they had removed the Inferno's ability to block healing effects. The memes immediately started to roll in. The Inferno was no longer an intimidating beast. It was now a joke. It's over. Not only that, a couple other key defenses were also nerfed. This wasn't just some nerfs, this was a pivotal point in Clash history. Some consider it the month where Clash lost all of its strategy. From here now, spam would only grow in popularity. Spam was here to stay. "2018 was a very interesting year for spam attack developments, because even though single troop spam was now considerably easier, we also saw the rise of multi-troop spam. Previously, we did take a look at a couple of these, like GoWiWi, Balloonian, and Lalo, and although those had always been around, and a few more that came and went, in 2018, they were everything. The two most prominent ones were Witch Slap, which was similar to GoWiWi, just executed a bit differently, which became even stronger after they removed the Eagle Artillery's Golem multiplier, and another was Bow Witch, comprised mostly of bowlers and witches, and sometimes a few giants. The rise of multi-troop spam was likely the result of all of those buffs in late 2017, but also additional buffs in 2018. So many troops now had good synergy with each other. How could you not pair them together? But also the introduction of clan war leagues was a big one as well. Most single troop spam strategies weren't reliable enough for 3 stars, so a lot of people were chasing after something much more solid. And multi-troop spam was the easiest option. And it's funny because it was during this time when the topic of to spam or not to spam was a pretty hot topic. Like, should you, let's say, spam your Lalo and call it a day, or start your attack with a kill squad or hero walk? At that time, more than ever, the community was divided on this topic. But regardless of the way you chose to play, this really showed how strong spam actually was. The highest town halls were now a walk in the park to 3-star, and though they did buff offense in a number of ways, nothing really impacted spam all that much. Even at Town Hall 12 with the new Giga Bomb, it just felt like a minor inconvenience. And on top of that, with Town Hall 10, 11, and 12 now having access to siege machines, spam was going crazy. But things were about to get even crazier for spammers, because a new troop was about to join the party. It was the perfect troop to spam. It's almost as if they made it to be spams. The most shocking, electrifying troop of the century, the Electro Dragon. Yeah, it wasn't as strong as most spam attacks, but it was stupid easy. You could spam them by themselves or with a couple balloons. If you can drag your finger across the screen, they did a pretty decent job most of the time with minimal effort. This was spam in its truest form. In fact, E-Drags would become synonymous with spam for a while due to it perfectly describing what spam was all about. If you think about it, E-Drags was very similar to what dragons were in 2012. Nothing but good old drop and forget, regardless of any consequences. By 2019, the spam meta was largely dominated by mass hogs, dragons, valkyries, and miners, the OGs, as well as E-Drag spam, Witch Slap, Lava Balloon, Bow Witch, and some new ones that emerged with the recently released Bad Spell. It was very diverse, but the meta was especially taken over by anything that involved witches. They just kept getting better. They moved her last 2 levels down a town hall, so now everyone's witches were immediately better, and the golems were buffed shortly after. This not only made Witch Slap and Bow Witch better, but allowed OG golems and witch spam to find a place at Town Hall 12. This was no surprise, as for the last 4 years, the witch was buffed constantly. She really took over 2019. It was the year of witch spam in some form or another. But a witch-dominated meta was about to be a thing of the past, because later that winter, the new kid in town was about to take over, the Yeti. The Yeti, like many troops in the old days, was spammed by itself. It was just that good. So much that they immediately started working on some nerfs. It's now 2020, everyone's leaving that old witch to spam some Yetis, and they were trying to act fast. The nerfs were right around the corner. However, they didn't actually nerf the Yeti itself, but the Yeti mites. Much like OG witch spam, where the skeletons would activate the traps before they affected the witch, so did the Yeti mites for the Yetis. They overwhelmed the crap out of Town Hall 12 and the brand new Town Hall 13. The nerfs didn't stop there, however, as a couple months later in March, they made it so that the Eagle Artillery didn't target the Yeti mites. Instead, it would go for the actual Yeti and deal some real damage. But that's not all, because they also reduced the Yeti mites damage to resource buildings. The Yeti had already been killed. Just kidding, Yeti spam never died. Spoiler alert, it's still alive today. I was just using it like last month. Anyway, something else stole the spotlight in 2020 as far as spam attacks go. The Super Witch for Town Hall 11 and up. Yeah, I was just exaggerating about people leaving the Witch for the Yeti. She was still everywhere, and now we had the Super Witch. What a delight for ground spam. Now, just dropping them all and forgetting about them wasn't the best way to use them, but you better believe it, what can be spammed will be spammed. And that was certainly the case for casuals looking for an easy army. If it works, it works. Another troop that was taken off at Town Hall 12 and 13 was the Super Giant. You'd bring several of them with mass witches, and they'd kill it. It was very similar to golems and witches in the way it was executed, except here you'd zap splash buildings and other key defenses. By the end of 2020, you had a wide range of options. For air, you had Lalo and Zap Dragons, which were even better after the Lightning Spell rework. And for ground, you had Witch Slap, Yeti Smash, Mass Super Witches, Super Giants, and even Hogs were viable at all Town Halls. If Hogs are shredding in any meta, you know spam is doing very good. And the list just kept growing in 2021, like Inferno Dragon spam after a recent buff. Yeah, you just spam them with some balloons and sprinkle on there some skeleton spells to distract defenses. Surprisingly, very effective. Mass Super Dragons as well, because what else would you do with dragons? Come on, dragons were basically made to be spammed. Mass Dragon Riders, these were mostly paired with other dragons because of their synergy, but they also had their own little spam thing going on. And last but not least, Mass Rocket Balloons. Yeah, any super troop that was being added at the time was spammed. As you can see, spam armies were multiplying, which is why it's starting to get a little hard to track down each and every one of them, as well as figuring out what nerfs and buffs impacted these strategies. It felt like if you tried hard enough, just about anything could be spammed at most town halls. And not much was being done to change this. It wasn't like the old days where they changed one defense and the whole meta would fall apart. No, they buffed some defenses and truce and nerfed others. And at the end of the day, it wasn't really doing much. Same armies, different day. With that said, I think this is a good time to stop mentioning balance changes and specific OG strategies altogether, except if it had a significant role in the history of spam. By 2021, Supercell wasn't interested in killing spam. They were more focused on nerfing the outliers that ruin the meta, particularly in the competitive scene. And so all of these minor nerfs and buffs that were being implemented didn't redefine spam as we know it. In fact, all of the aforementioned strategies were still around and booming below Town 14. It was pretty clear that spam was healthy for the game. Spam was good. Indeed it is, but maybe too good because Town Hall 14 and 15 were about to give spam a run for its money. Nothing had a bigger impact on spam in 2021 through 23 than just how difficult these town halls were getting. And so this chapter focuses on the struggles of spam at higher town halls during this time. It all started with Town Hall 14. That poison bomb was no joke. Not even the Grand Warden could save your troops. He'd be stuck in there with them. And it wasn't just the bomb. Town Hall 14's new Giga Inferno and all of its other defenses were considerably stronger. And so simple spam attacks were really starting to struggle up here. Don't get me wrong, you could still shred a base with mass super dragons, Yeti Smash, or a few hybrids, to name a few, especially if the bases were on the weaker side, but it was pretty apparent that good old spam was not enough in many cases. The reliance on kill squads, hero walks, and blimps were now more important than ever. Proper armies were definitely the way to go, and sure, spam always finds its way, right? But something was different about these town halls. It was like 2015 all over again, where spam was suspiciously easy, but then defense started to fight back. This was largely due to the community's influence on Supercell's decisions. Half of the community was saying that Clash was too easy. What in the Clash of spam is going on, you know? Put some strategy back into the strategy game, for crying out loud. Tired of all this E-drag nonsense, getting shredded by Yetis. But on the other hand, you had casuals like, nah bro, spam is life, and life is good. What? Bro, what are you talking? Get this guy out of here. Yes, there was a bit of feud going on in these years, some pushing for a harder game, while others defending simple attacks like spam. But things only got more difficult with the release of Town Hall 15, often regarded as the hardest meta since Town Hall 10. The new spell towers and monolith proved to be pretty devastating for every attack known to man. You thought scatter shots were hard? Wait until you run into a raged one. And that monolith? Good luck to your heroes. And at this point, spam attacks were hanging by a thread. Any form of unplanned attacks for that matter were far too risky for Town Hall 15. It was often easy to get those first 2 stars, but that 3rd star was pretty difficult. So much that by December 2022, they were already dialing it back. Months later, in June 2023, all spell tower settings were nerfed. But at the same time, other very strong defenses got new levels like the Eagle Artillery, Tesla, Scatter Shots, and Builder Huts, as well as several traps. It's as if Town Hall 15 was increasing in difficulty. For many Town Hall 15 players, they were met with this new reality that 2 stars was the new normal. But thankfully, not for long. I mean, Supercell was busy with clan capital updates and overhauling the builder base, so it did take over a year, but during this time, high-level spam started to creep up and it could be defined as some sort of Yeti spam, Electro Titan spam, Ice Bat, and Double Hog spam. These spammy armies, of course, had their weaknesses, but most would get by just fine. By late 2023, Supercell understood that this was not what the majority of players wanted. They had made these upper town halls far too difficult for the average player, so something needed to change. In September 2023, Supercell would significantly nerf the offensive power of Town Hall 10 through 14, and on December 13th, they would nerf the living crap out of Town Hall 15. It's as if they had flipped a switch that made the entire game way easier. The storm had passed. That's really good. Anyway, I'm supposed to say something like, Clash would never be the same. I mean, really, those nerfs had a pretty significant impact on the meta as a whole, and it would never return to that level of difficulty. And this was only the beginning. There was about to be an upcoming change that would usher Clash of Clans into a new era and reshape spam forever. Hero equipment. I think it goes without saying, but this was a monumental change to Clash of Clans. All of a sudden, you weren't stuck with the default hero abilities, some of which were terrible. This was great. Now you could synergize your heroes with your attack strategies, and man, did it make a huge difference. EQ boots made any smash or ground attacks 10 times better. The Warden's Rage Gem and Healing Tome were bringing dead strategies back from the dead. Giant Arrow allowed you to bring considerably less lightning spells for zap attacks. It was like Christmas. Well, I mean, it was in December, so I guess it was actually Christmas. But yeah, heroes were now stronger than ever, and it's not like they were weak before, so now they were stupid OP. And with all those nerfs that had happened, it was now incredibly easy to 3-star any base. The heroes did most of the work, everything else was just background noise, just pick a darn troop to spam and call it a day. Spam was everywhere. Just a couple months prior, the first mashup event happened, which introduced us to the most spammable troop in Clash history, the Lava Loon. It's like they weren't even trying to balance anything anymore. The Lava Loon was absolutely busted. You couldn't mess it up. If you didn't get 3 stars, maybe you forgot to put your blindfold on. That usually helps a lot. But the Lava Loon wasn't everything. The Root Riders had recently come out, and they too were very OP, dealing decent damage, having a lot of HP, and breaking walls. This was peak spam. It doesn't get any better. Spammy troops, significantly weaker defenses, and broken hero equipment. It's no surprise that by the end of 2023, players were referring to the game as Clash of Spam. And that was not an exaggeration. You could spam anything. If you tried hard enough, you could shred with barbarians and archers at the highest town halls. It was nuts. And all of those strategies that had died at some point or became ineffective at a certain town hall, yeah, that didn't matter anymore. Just spam it all. Bring it all back from the dead. Mass dragons, mass hogs, mass witches, your mom, just pick one. The meta was spam. It didn't really matter what you were running. And we just saw more of it throughout 2024. Not only were they releasing more crazy equipment, but also still nerfing defense and buffing offense. In June of that year, almost every defense in Town Halls 10 through 15 got significantly nerfed, while many troops at those Town Halls got buffed. Now, 3-starring was already easy enough at those town halls, but now far easier. The lines between skilled attacks versus spam was beginning to fade as spam became increasingly viable in competitive play. In fact, it became so easy that in esports, it wasn't about if you can 3-star, it was about how fast you can drop Root Riders, you know what I'm saying? History often repeats itself. We have seen the game get this easy and then difficult and then easy again, and the cycle repeats itself over and over. However, this time around, Supercell had learned from its past mistakes and didn't want to up the ante on defense again. They were pretty set on making Clash easy because at the end of the day, most players are casuals and casuals love spam. It's fun and scratches that itch just right. It's satisfying. It was at this point where they were pretty determined to put strategy back into the game, just not in the entire game. Casuals and them good old spammers can have their clash, and those looking for a challenge can also have their clash, but with hard mode. This was Supercell's way of making both sides happy, and it worked. By 2025, hard mode was already being used in esports, and Supercell knew this was definitely the way to go, eventually becoming the tournament standard. This allowed them to keep working on making Clash more casual than ever, like completely removing training time. Now, you could drop all the mini drags without waiting all day. But also in June of that year, we saw even more defense nerfs, and at the same time, the Super Yeti. My current favorite troop to spam. Let me show you how to do it. Of course, this entire time, there were some balance changes that you could argue impacted spam, but at this point, I'm gonna have to say that spam is pretty bulletproof. Balance changes have had a very little impact on the state of the spam meta, and it's been that way since 2023. Today, offense continues to overpower defense, allowing for any troop to be considered spammable. With just the right equipment and spells, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to make it work. And with there being no training costs or times, and trophies being yeeted out of existence, there are no consequences to going crazy and dropping whatever you want. Now more than ever, it truly feels like Clash of Spam. Okay, but a half-hour video Havoc, it ain't that deep.